Hi all. This is a small presentation on the documentation under transfer pricing. The objective of this presentation is to understand the legal provisions of documentation and to maintain the proper documentation for the clients for whom we are doing the TP audit and the TP study. The presentation will include and cover legal provisions, process, segments of documentation, scope of documentation, filing, needs of the client, and the documentation process in that respect, and the databases which can be looked into for achieving the proper supportings for the various transactions. Coming to the legal provisions, Section 92D of Income Tax Act, read with Rule 10D of the Income Tax Rules, cast an obligation on the taxpayer to maintain contemporaneous documentation with respect to international transactions. The said rules exempt the taxpayer from maintaining such documentation wherein the aggregate monetary value of international transaction in a year is less than 1 crore. So it's only required in the cases where the transaction value is more than 1 crore. The process of documentation goes like this. There has to be a planning, then information gathering, comparable data has to be searched, then the benchmarking is done, and then there comes documentation. In the planning process, we understand the background of the company, prepare a plan. In a information gathering stage, we fetch the information from the previous year records, from wherever sources of information, for example the management discussions, review of agreements, the questionnaire that we send to the client. On that basis, there is a comparable data that is searched. There is a search strategy that we follow. Then benchmarking is done, and then the documentation is done. Documentation as such is divided into 3 segments. These are entity related documentation, transaction related documentation, and price related documentation. In entity related documentation, we document industry profile, group profile, profile of an Indian entity, and profile of associated entity. In transaction related documentation, we document the function, asset and risk analysis, various agreements, various invoices, and price related correspondences like letters, emails, etc. And then comes the pricing related documentation, which includes terms of transaction, economic analysis, method selection, comparable benchmarking, forecast, budgets, estimates, or any other document that specify the pricing methodology that is being followed by the client globally. One of the very relevant aspect of documentation is proper filing. For filing purpose, there can be 5 flags in a documentation file. The flags will say master file, transaction file, TP study, TP certification, TP assessment. In master file, it is further divided into journal and policy related. Journal information will be like ownership and management structure, line of businesses, and key products dealt in. So in journal, it's more of a then further divided into the group and the taxpayer, and the AE and the industry. So it deals in the various information like historical background, shareholding pattern, organizational structure, business model, key business segments, key products and their applications, industry classification, customer profile, physical and functional setup, employee profile, research and development activity, key financials numbers, and global scenario, Indian scenario. When we go to the industry documentation, the key value drivers, internal and external independence, market size, regulatory framework, SWOT analysis, industry outlook, those things come in a master file. And then we go in a transaction file. That means the flag containing the transaction file will talk about things like agreements and invoices, FAR related documents, and pricing related documents will go under transaction file. Further things that will include like complete list of international specified transactions, quality, quantity, and price related information, terms of transaction, pricing methodology, characterization of transactions, margin workings, the FAR analysis, comparability will all go in a transaction file. FAR analysis will include function performed, asset deployed, risk assumed. Comparability will include identification of comparable uncontrolled transaction, quantity, quality, and price related information, terms of transactions, margin workings, basis and process of selection, FAR profile of comparable entities, etc. So we've seen that master file will basically contain all the master key details of the company. Transaction file is a further low into information that it will go into a finer details of the company containing the various agreements and invoices, FAR related information, and pricing related information. Then comes the TP study. The third flag is TP study. We need to ask the client for the TP study report of the past years, as well as in case there is some global TP study that has been done. Then it's TP certifications. In TP certification, it's assumptions. We need to take note of all the assumptions that we take while giving the TP certificate, various notes and undertaking and representations that we take from the client under this flag. Under the flag TP certification, we will include the previous year's Form 3 CEB, the assumptions that had been taken in the certificate following the process of certification, notes and undertaking and representation. Lastly comes the TP assessment, which is very relevant, because the documentation that is being done at the time of giving the certificate is and will always be relevant at the time of assessment. So it is very essential that the documentation and the TP study is done taking into account the TP assessment that it's going to may or may not come in the later years. So the litigation support will come under this flag. The documentation like emails and the proofs and the benefit derived from a transaction. For example, in case of a management service fee, now these people under the benefit test, they've been asking about the benefit that has been derived by the party which is paying the management fees. So all these type of documentation will come under TP assessment. So what we have seen that for filing we have to divide the file under 5 flags that will say master file, transaction file, TP study, TP certification and TP assessment. Under master file, it will include the details regarding the group, the taxpayer, the associated enterprise and the industry. Under transaction file flag, it will include the details regarding international transactions, the FAR analysis, comparability, pricing details, etc. And it will have the invoices and the agreements as well. Under TP study, it will have the characterization analysis, benchmarking details and justification of all the transactions. Also, it will have the past year's TP study and the group TP study if any. Under TP certifications, will include past year, Form 3 CEB, the assumptions, notes an undertaking and representation that has been taken from the client. For TP assessment, we have to keep ready all the document that might be required for the help under litigation, then that will prove as a litigation support. So this is all that is pertaining to documentation and the sources of documentation. As we are aware that Capital Line and ProS are the two major sources of databases that are domestic. Besides that, there are international databases as well. That is Abadios, which is www.bvdinfo.com. The second international source is Transfer Pricing Analytics, that is by Edstart LLC, and it is available at www.edgarstat.com. Then there is another source called OneSource Transfer Pricing, and it is available at onesource.thomsonreuters.com. As we have seen that in the case of royalty payment, there is a lot of litigation and lot of and the data is just impossible to get. There is one source that we can get the data from, that is www.royal stat tstat.com. That is www.royaltstat.com. So these are the major sources of databases from which the documentation support can be achieved. So this is all that we need to take care while doing the documentation. We have to follow the process. We have to divide the documentation into three levels, that is entity, transaction and price, and then we have to segment it, the filing as well. We have to seek the proper information from the client regarding their historical background, shareholding pattern, organizational structure, business model, key business segments, and their agreements, invoices at the time of certification, at the time of audit only. So hope it's